Thank you, Sean, and a very warm welcome everyone to this workshop on accelerating innovation and startups in the nature-based economy. Before I introduce you to our panel of speakers, and I'm going to present a video of some pretty cool nature-based enterprises from all across Europe. However, I thought first of all it could be interesting to provide you with some context on the topic that we're discussing here today. So what do we mean when we talk about the nature-based economy and nature-based enterprises? Let me see if I can click on to the first slide here. I think I'm a little bit over-enthusiastic on the clicking here. Let's go back to the beginning. Okay, excellent. So I really like this quotation that you can see here from John Bell, who's the director of the Healthy Planet Directorate at the European Commission. And he explains, I suppose, the nature-based economy and the potential of it much better than I could. So he explains how the EU recovery plan from COVID and the Green Deal will unleash this massive level of investment, which is being directed towards new types of business and new value chains. And these new value chains, these new types of businesses are much more in line with these ambitions of both the UK and Europe to transition towards a net zero economy by 2050. And he specifically identifies the potential of nature-based enterprises to be part of this recovery and to contribute to the Green Deal. And we can see from our own research that the number of nature-based enterprises is growing. So we undertook a survey. I think Esme will maybe present a little bit later on this, but you can see that the number of nature-based enterprises is growing. And why are we seeing so many more enterprises emerging in this sector? Well, I suppose quite simply they're responding to increased market demand. So we have seen over the last couple of years that the UN, the EC, and global bodies like the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the IUCN, they've all mainstreamed this concept of nature-based solutions into their policies in the last years in order to address climate change and biodiversity loss. And it's not just at policy level and at public sector level where these policies are being taken up. We're also seeing increased demand for nature-based solutions from the private sector, in particular from large corporates who are investing in nature as a key asset for their business. However, on the flip side, we're also beginning to see that this increasing demand is leading to difficulties with supply. And I suppose this is really where nature-based enterprises come in. Nature-based enterprises can help public, private and third sector organisations to design, deliver and manage nature-based solutions in the long term. At this stage, I suppose you're wondering, what do we mean when we say a nature-based enterprise? Is it a new term? Well, I would say it's a new term, but it's an umbrella term for a number of organisations that perhaps already exist. This is the official definition, which is in a research publication available on our website. Nature-based enterprises, essentially, they use nature as a core element of their product or service offering. Nature may be used directly by growing, harnessing, harvesting or restoring natural resources in a sustainable way. For example, you have green buildings companies directly using nature. You may have ecosystem restoration organisations. Nature may also be used indirectly by contributing to the planning, delivery or stewardship of sustainable nature-based solutions. For example, we have landscape architects and we have companies using smart technologies to monitor and manage nature-based solutions in the long term. So there's a wide diversity of different types of enterprises who fall under this kind of umbrella term of nature-based enterprises. And I suppose what's really important and consistent with the European definition of nature-based solutions is that nature-based enterprises support climate change and biodiversity policy, and they generate benefits for local economies, for the communities, and for the wider environment. If you're interested in the concept, you'll find a lot more information on our platform. You'll find information, guidebooks, research publications, and so on. And indeed, if you're interested in actually, seeing the profiles, a number of these nature-based enterprises, or seeing what nature-based enterprises are active in your city or in your country, this platform actually aims to connect buyers and suppliers of nature-based solutions globally. It was launched just 6 months ago, and already there are hundreds of nature-based enterprises from across Europe and even further afield registered. And what I think is different about this platform, and what we really like about it, is at the heart of it are these communities of practice in different sectors. So these are just some of the communities, and you can see there that there are in different areas, from nature-based solutions, from green buildings, the very important topic of co-creation and how do you engage communities in building nature-based solutions, sustainable agriculture, and so on. But each of these communities is actually led by what we call an industry ambassador, who's a practitioner and a leader in their own field. And the goal of these communities is to network organisations, to bring them together to learn about industry best practice, and really to raise awareness of what's happening in the sector. And I was delighted actually in some of the networking sessions over the last couple of days to come across new startups, and a shout out here to Cisco from he set up a green wall company from Mallorca. A number of you might have met him in the networking sessions, and he's been following this community and learning from the industry leaders on how to do this. So best of luck with your new enterprise. Anyway, that's enough for me at this stage. If you're interested, and I should just say before I move on, that these communities aren't just for enterprises. If you're a city or you're a research centre and you're interested in this topic, this is very much open to engagement right across the board from many different stakeholders. And each of the communities organises a series of webinars on different topics. Okay, lastly, I just want to introduce you now to our panel of speakers. I'm trying to, okay, so I'm delighted to introduce Stina Kondrup, who's one of the founders of the incubator in Denmark. And she also wears the second cap as she's a nature-based entrepreneur herself. So hopefully we get a chance to hear more about your experiences on both sides. Then we have Stuart Connop. He's, again, wearing two caps. He's the technical guru here in Connecting Nature, and today will be presenting the Arena incubator in London. Then we have Colm O'Driscoll, and Colm, I think we spoke to when we first started researching this area. Colm was one of the first people I spoke to, because it was the first, I think you're the first nature-based incubator in the world. A strong interest in sustainable forestry, but also in NBS for health and well-being. So I think you definitely probably have the advantage of being the longest established, although that's not very long. And then there are three incubators who we'll be hearing from. And then later on in the session, we'll be hearing from Agnieszka Osipiuk, who's the organizer-in-chief, I think we'll call you that today, of the Connecting Nature Summit. So we're coming to the end of the Glasgow Summit. But Agnieszka is just starting. Sean can breathe a sigh of relief, because Agnieszka is just starting to gear up for the summit at the end of June. And the summit will be entirely focused on the nature-based economy and nature-based enterprises. So on the 29th and 30th of June, I think registration is already pre-opened, so I hope you can join us there. And finally, we'll finish off with Sean Kelly, multi-talented organizer-in-chief. He thought he was a planner, but now he's organising an incubation programme. So we're delighted to have Sean join us at the end of the session to explain the kind of pilots which are happening in this area in Glasgow. Esme will be channeling some questions from the chat to us, so please, I encourage you to add your questions, your comments on this really exciting topic, and we'll come to them after we have a little listen now. First of all, to some nature-based enterprises. So we have a little video prepared, and this features 12 nature-based enterprises we've managed to squeeze in from 8 different countries across Europe, and it'll just give you a flavour of the diversity of nature-based enterprises that we're talking about here today.
I am a landscape architect publisher and podcaster. And I had the pleasure of designing 20 natural playgrounds in kindergartens and 3 school grounds. Our gardens serve children and teachers. They allow close contact with nature. They should be an everyday landscape.
We are from the Syriza Playground. We started this organization about 1 year ago out of our love in Brussels.
Painting murals together with people, allowing them to discover their neighborhoods in creative ways. It is the community that allows us to exist, so we really take the contribution very seriously.
I work in the nature-based enterprise Cuatro Rayas, located in A Coruña, Spain. We rebuild spaces and landscapes to make them more efficient and sustainable. We work with the Cultural Association of Leira to take cultural context into account when planning organic farming projects.
We're the School of Looking.
Our project is the Eco Showboat, a zero-carbon floating art science infrastructure.
The venue is a historic barge where we will develop art, science and educational projects about climate change and freshwater ecology.
And we'll be working with communities we meet as we travel across Ireland, navigating the inland waterways.
This is Damian, a head of development from Deepster, innovation-oriented SME from Koper, Slovenia, a country about 60% covered by forest. We develop wooden furniture without artificial materials using domestic wood species, 100% natural processing with no chemical additives, biodegradable and recyclable. Our furniture won several international design awards and have been recognized as excellent eco-product.
I am the founder of Bollenstreek Hout in the Netherlands, collecting trees and upgrade them to local product. We like to put new trees for every tree we are receiving. Our main activity is to become a source bank for trees.
I'm an architect and the managing director of Helix Pflanzensysteme in Convestheim, Germany. We develop vertical green systems, we build and maintain instant green noise barrier walls and manage the growth of the vegetation. We love to work with nature and have the ecosystem services of our vertical green gardens to make urban areas more livable and more resilient.
Gekko Gardens is a nature-based enterprise located in Stuttgart, Germany. We empower city people to produce organic food everywhere. We do this with our Gekko Garden systems, which fertilize and irrigate themselves automatically. Your kitchen waste gets recycled in our integrated vermicompost and enables you to produce fresh herbs and vegetables everywhere.
Well, the Citizen Bike Garden is a combination of a garden, and it also has space and storage space for bikes. There is a blackboard that is also meant for communication with neighbors. So it actually combines 3 things: a garden, a bike shed, and a way to communicate and cooperate with neighbors. A lot of neighbors actually wanted to contribute, and so the team actually evolved into this beautiful group of people that came and went and all put their tiny contributions to the garden.
I'm from company Naturem Solutions in Belgium. We've been active since 2018 as a consultancy in the field of water management and treatment.
Our mission is to protect bees and to spread urban beekeeping as a virtuous practice for sustainable cities and communities. In 2019, we developed and we launched across the globe an innovative urban beehive who makes beekeeping safe, simple and interactive.
I'm an ecological engineer and entrepreneur dedicated to applying emerging technologies to improve the health of urban ecosystems for future generations. I work with a company called Soil Mania and combines decades of experience in soil biology and arboriculture to create 3 different state-of-the-art soil sensors. Our most popular is the soil moisture sensor, which lets people understand where soil is too dry and where it might need water. This can really revolutionize nature-based solutions and how we manage green infrastructure, mostly because we're moving from a currently very reactive sector to a proactive sector.
The most important challenge we face is education. We talk and write about nature deficit disorder and why play in the nature is so important for small children.
We are engaging the community with participatory activities and try to build bridges between the communities, between the different groups, and also strengthen their connection with the city itself.
When planning organic farming projects, considering factors such as location and levels of sunshine. And we also carry out digital surveys to propose consensual ideas like in A Coruña Hosa Park.
The main challenge is actually to get funding to pre-finance the source, because time from receiving the tree up to fabricated product is approximately 1 to 2 years, depending on the species.
So is it perfect? No, it is not. But do we need more projects like this to learn how to cooperate, to learn how to talk to each other and to have conversations about the future of our city? Yes, absolutely. It's only by doing those projects that we learn how to work together.
The main challenge we've encountered in that field is the lack of regulatory constraints and also a lack of client awareness about nature-based solutions.
One of the main challenges we run into is helping people understand that technology is not something to be afraid of. In fact, technology can really help optimize the way that we manage nature-based solutions.
If I could give you some advice, talk with people about their fears, explain, educate, and be patient.
You are a nature-based enterprise. Does it make a difference for people and for society what you do and the services you offer? Then go ahead, stick to your goals and do one step after the other. You are going to perform a marathon. Make sure you can earn money with your doings and be aware of your resources.
Stay patient, keep going, and believe in yourself. All the good things take time.
Pilot it, test it, and keep iterating and rapid prototyping until you found something that works. Don't forget to tell everybody about the great work you're doing. Communication is half the battle.
I like to say that it's important to know the past to build the future.
Our advice to succeed and grow is to dream big and never forget why you're doing what you're doing.
Fantastic. So I hope you're all suitably inspired by some of our creative entrepreneurs. Now we've had a look at some of our nature-based enterprises. It's time to meet some of the people behind the scenes, some of the incubators who are working to support these entrepreneurs and help their businesses to start up and grow. So I'm going to ask each of our three incubators, Stephen, Stuart and Colin, to give a brief presentation, first of all, 2 minutes on their own incubator, and then we'll go and have a panel discussion where we will address some of the questions and some of the challenges brought up by the nature-based enterprises in that video. So, Stephen, can I hand over to you to introduce Greencubator?
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Stine, and I'm so excited to be here today. Thank you all to the organizers for this platform to engage in the discussion about startups in the nature-based economy. I represent Greencubator, which is a community of SMEs, entrepreneurs, and NGOs. I co-founded Greencubator back in 2015, and we have hosted more than 300 entrepreneurs working with sustainability, and a lot of them working directly or indirectly with nature-based solutions. The vision with Greencubator is to create a platform where everyone gets the opportunity to contribute to the green transition through entrepreneurship, community building, and partnerships. Our place in the entrepreneurial ecosystem is in the sprouting premature stage, where our partnerships with professional advisories help companies with legal documentation, pitching training, sales, marketing, and communication workshops, recruiting talents, and very important fundraising. With our collaborative workspace, networking events, and advisory services, we aim to create a platform for sustainable development. Let me just go to the next slide here. In parallel to Greencubator, I founded Into Green, which today employs 6 people working with interactive educational platforms and design development advisory of purpose-driven projects. Today we are partners in the European Horizon 2020 project ReGreen, and with our activities we aim to foster and promote nature-based enterprises and develop interactive educational material about nature-based solutions. I hope that gave a little insight to what we're doing. Thank you.
That's great, Steen. Thank you so much. And I think it's always interesting to see it from both sides of the fence. So you're almost always better to be able to give advice and support to startups when you've been in that position yourself. But let's move now to a little bit closer to home and to London. And Stuart, could I ask you to perhaps introduce a little bit the background and the activities of Arena?
Yeah, sure, no problem. I just echo the thanks for giving this opportunity. So I'm Stuart, as Siobhan said. I'm from the University of East London Sustainability Research Institute, and I'm one of the team of researchers working on the Arena Business Support Programme in London in the UK. Arena started in April 2019 and was part of the legacy of the partnership between the Sustainability Research Institute and Barking Riverside Limited that developed during the EU FP7 project TURAS. So within TURAS, we worked collaboratively with Barking Riverside on a living lab style approach to the development of a new community housing 26,000 people in East London. The project had a specific focus on the design of the green infrastructure across the development to deliver nature-based solutions to local challenges. We also worked on building social capacity, both in terms of the new community coming in, but also in relation to bridging to the existing community in the neighbouring areas. One topic that had less focus was the economic aspects of nature-based solutions, and in particular, the opportunities around entrepreneurship and nature-based enterprises. And we recognised this was a key market gap in terms of business support. A new ecology centre at the heart of the development represented an opportunity for us to focus on this, and a programme was developed where a collaboration between our research institute and Barking Riverside is now supporting businesses and startups locally and across London involved in nature-based solutions, green infrastructure and resource efficiency. Let me just see if I can change the slide. Yeah, we're providing a diverse range of support types, bespoke to the needs of individual businesses, and this support's being delivered across a range of geographical contexts. Firstly, at our university campuses, using our facilities, laboratories and analytical equipment. Secondly, at the Barking Riverside Ecology Centre, which can be used as an exhibition space to showcase and test emerging nature-based solution and resource efficiency products at the heart of this large-scale housing development. And thirdly, using a network of living labs across London to monitor and evaluate nature-based solution products in situ after they've been installed. Thanks.
Thank you, Stu. That is great. I mean, I think it's what your presentation has shown there is really the importance of partnering as well with research institutes, in particular in an area like nature-based solutions, where there's often a very strong technical component and there's a lack of evidence of impact. So the fact that you can support businesses in measuring their impact, I think, is a really, really important aspect of the services you offer. So now we move to Colm, the very first. We probably should have started with you, Colm, actually. But if you can introduce us perhaps a little bit to Etifor and your experience with that incubation program.
Yeah, Thank you, Siobhan, and thank you to Connecting Nature for this opportunity, and thanks also for nominating Etifor, because I think it's the right place to start with this experience. I can't take much of the praise for Ecostar. I'm not the founder. I was the program manager, but Ecostar was a journey. It was an experience, and we were actually the first accelerator. But it was the founder of the company that I work for, which is also a nature-based enterprise, Etifor SRL, who actually also founded the accelerator for which I went on then to develop the program for. Where the idea came from, really looking at something that we are familiar with in our company, which is sustainable forest management and everything that goes with that. And we really looked at the problems connected to these, and looked at the possibility and the opportunity, the future opportunity that exists with halting, for example, deforestation. As you can see here, the value of what that is worth by 2030, and that value is actually changing on an annual basis as the value increases, the value of nature. We also looked at, on a Europe-wide scale, the level of entrepreneurship education in our sector. So again, looking at agriculture and forestry sectors. And we found that 1 in 10 schools is actually providing entrepreneurship education in the EU, which is shocking, to be honest, because it's an underfunded sector, but it's also, in relation to entrepreneurship education, is also a sector that is lacking this kind of opportunity. We also looked at what 400 million entrepreneurs do around the world to try and fine-tune and better our own model, which went on to become the Nature Accelerator. And with that, we wrote first a project. The project was Ecostar. It was a project co-funded by the Erasmus Plus program of the European Union. And we wrote this project as a business model, and the business model itself was the Nature Accelerator. And the Nature Accelerator was essentially then funded by an impact investor in the US who essentially gave us the opportunity to run the world's first Nature Accelerator. And from then we have run other programs. So that's essentially the story.
Very good. Thanks, Colm, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about the kind of your experience as we move into the panel discussion. So actually, what I'd like to do now is maybe, first of all, go back to the video and look at some of the challenges which were identified by our nature-based enterprises. A question I always wonder is, to what extent the challenges faced by nature-based enterprises is the same or different to the challenges faced by any other type of startup? So maybe, Colm, we'll stick with you for the moment, and we'll come to this perennial question of financing. I mean, this is always an issue for any startup across any sector. But one of the things that jumped out for me was the video was Ted. Ted mentioned that the particular issue around working capital, and he mentioned that sometimes it can take up to 2 years from when they get the raw material in the form of the tree to the end product. That seems to me to be perhaps longer than, say, certainly a tech startup. In your experience, though, is there generally a longer time frame before these nature-based enterprises get out of that, valley of death and start making revenues and reach that point of viability, I suppose? Is that your experience? And if it is your experience, how have you addressed this challenge, or how have you seen it addressed?
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer, but if I remember correctly, the example, I mean, we're looking at possibly in this particular case, almost an artisan-like product, where a lot of effort is going into the production almost by hand of something that comes from, yes, a raw material. I would say this, yeah, it really depends on the service, and it really depends on the product. Getting, I suppose, speeding up the financing is always a difficult one. Also because these business models, essentially in our experience, the business models are doing more than just what other startups will be doing. They're also looking at focusing on impact, or they're also looking at focusing on maybe the sustainable management of the resources where they're sourcing their raw materials from. Or maybe they're targeting a market that is slightly more, I would say, sensitive to ethical aspects or social aspects or environmentally friendly aspects, and these things all take a little bit more time, I think. So trying to penetrate that kind of market takes time. Also, products may, for example, be applying some sort of standard or certification, in which case, if they're doing that, these things also take time as well. Thinking about wood products, for example, we have a classic certification scheme called Forest Stewardship Council. And if you really want to the FSC certification, and if you really want to incorporate these kind of certifications or standards into your business model to show people that you're doing things sustainably or ethically or socially or whatever in a responsible way, then it's most likely that it's going to take a little bit longer. That said, how can you speed it up? I mean, what we've seen, we had a very interesting business model in our accelerator. It was actually they were selling insect crackers, and these guys, they essentially, when they came to us, they had been bootstrapping their business for a couple of years, and ours was the first investment that really was a big hit for them in terms of interest, but also somebody turning around, oh, wow, this is interesting. But 2 years later, 3 years later, they're still finding it difficult. They have made one big contract with Sainsbury in the UK with this model, and now they have their insect crackers on the shelves of Sainsbury. But what did it take for them to get there? It actually took a pivot. It took a changing of the brand. It took a changing of the name. It took all four of them renting the same place for 3 years, saving money, and so on and so forth. You have to keep testing the market, and it's not easy. And if you find also that the market is just not interested in your product, you also need to change focus. I don't know if that maybe answers in part the question, but
Yeah.
there's a lot there, and I would say the service is really depending much on the service and the product being offered.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. And indeed, I think part of the challenge is raising awareness of the differences and these kind of longer time frames. And that is something which maybe if policymakers and startup business programs are unfamiliar with nature-based enterprises, I suppose raising awareness among this audience that this is the norm. You mentioned standards and certification, and it reminded me a little bit of the pharma sector. Not perhaps an obvious comparison, but also in terms of the long time frames to get launch on the market, and the importance of certification and standards. So I think a kind of key element is the need for awareness among policymakers and programs to support that kind of valley of death, and realise that very often it's a longer time frame to market. So that kind of issue of education and awareness is something which I think a number of different enterprises identified in the video. And Stuart, just coming to you, maybe, how have you found this lack of awareness? Have you found it to be major challenges for the kind of enterprises that you're supporting? And how have you helped them address this?
Yeah, definitely. I recognise this as a challenge for the businesses we've been supporting too. We see the lack of awareness of nature-based solutions and lack of acceptance of this approach to urban design, including kind of regulatory constraints, as a big barrier for many of the businesses. The businesses are trying to implement multifunctional solutions, often in sectors that are based on single or very narrow performance outcomes, and sectors based traditionally on kind of grey infrastructure engineered approaches. It can be quite challenging to make the case for broader benefits in such situations. For example, a standard roof performs a very narrow function, keeps a building warm, keeps the inside of the building dry. A green roof, by contrast, can perform a whole range of other functions, but in a market that only values the building being warm and dry, and with regulatory constraints designed for this, arguing the value of a green roof can be quite challenging. On top of this, if there's only previously been these kind of green bling type approaches to green infrastructure, or even nature-based solutions that for some reason are perceived to fail, perhaps because the stewardship plan wasn't in place, negative perceptions associated with can require a really significant evidence base to change standard practices and processes. So in ARENA, one of the things that we're doing is helping to address these challenges by providing support on particularly building evidence in relation to nature-based solution products and services for our MBEs, supporting them in developing new markets, but also in competing with other approaches in these existing markets.
Yeah, that's a really important point, and I suppose it echoes, the point that I made after your introduction, that nature-based solutions, whether they're implemented by the public sector or whether the champion is in the private sector or even nature-based enterprise, one of the big challenges is how do you measure impact and how do you measure effectiveness in comparison with other solutions. So again, it's really important that I suppose nature-based enterprises take this seriously, and one of the most successful methods of raising awareness that we hear from the 10 cities involved in Connecting Nature is, organising a pilot, and the results from the pilot are very often provide the kind of evidence base that's needed for a larger scale rollout, and it kind of overcomes that initial fear of the unknown. So I suppose, speaking of the fear of the unknown, Estina, I might come to you because I know you mentioned your startup, Intergreen, is in the technology space. And I suppose technology is maybe not something that we would often associate with nature-based enterprises, but we have a whole community on the use of smart technologies for nature-based solutions, and it's really important. But have you come across this lack of awareness of the potential to harness technology, and how have you addressed that both in your own business and the businesses that you support in this space?
Well, also a very tricky question, because the use of technology can be very different. In Intergreen, we work with technology as a magnifier to get experiences in nature. We work indirectly with nature-based solutions with development of educational platforms, exhibitions, and apps that are connected to location-specific activities in nature. Because we believe that in order to accelerate the green transition, we need to foster a bottom-up demand, and we need to reconnect and experience the wonders of nature in order to fight for more nature and rewilding the nature. So the way we work with technology is to enhance these experiences, in most of the cases, urban nature. And so we have a experience with developing an app called Worldsify, which is a location-based visual storytelling in nature. And we've, of course, met people. So we developed this app some years ago, and we were met by people who would find it very paradoxical, as you mentioned, to use technology to experience nature, because some believe that we need to disconnect to connect with nature. However, we see the feedback we get from the users is that this kids app and the activities really guide to unexpected knowledge and experiences. And most important, that this creates a common story, or it connects the kids and the parents in the natural platform there. So I think the fear of technology, if we were talking about this a few years ago, I think my answer would be very different, because right now in Copenhagen, there is really a wave of awareness about nature. And it's a very political infected topic at the moment, because we have some great urban nature spaces that are being sold by the municipality to to housing instead of these recreational spaces. And I think we can use technology to create this awareness about the importance of nature. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think I really like the different aspects of the way you can use technology. So you mentioned raising awareness, and I know my own kids are always stuck on their apps the whole time. I'd love to see them even using their apps outdoors. Would be a great progress from using them indoors. But to use them to discover nature in an interactive way, I think it's really the importance of interacting with kids, and we saw that in the video from Poznan with all of the natural playgrounds. It's really important to instill that love of education or love of nature in children from a very young age. And the other aspect of technology which we saw in the video was, again, going back to the monitoring and being able to measure impact, and as Stuart mentioned earlier, being able to ensure the effective management and stewardship of nature-based solutions in the long run. So I think technology is perhaps an area that's been underexplored in terms of its application to nature, and maybe within this smart cities dimension that we keep hearing about, that this is an area where we could explore more pilots. I'm going to just invite, by the way, I see there's a couple of questions coming through in the chat. If anyone has any more questions, please feel free to add them. I've got a couple of other questions from our panel, and then we will go to the questions from chat. So please keep the questions coming, that would be great. Just before we move on, because I want to look at your own incubators and the financing and business models that you have, because there's not very many incubators supporting this sector. And I want to understand a little bit about your own business models. But just before we do that, just to ask, from your experience, do the nature-based enterprises that you're dealing with, do they have any different requirements in terms of supports than kind of other types of startups? I don't know who wants to start with that. Colm, you're nodding vigorously, so we'll start with you.
Yeah, they do. I mean, in part, well, we had a particular model in the sense that we were kind of learning by doing when we did it. We have a little bit more of experience of it now, but when we were approached by this impact investor Fledge series in the US from Seattle, they kind of handed us their methodology. And we said, wow, okay, we weren't used to something like that before. And they hand you their tools and the criteria and the impact, the assessment, all of this stuff is given to you and you understand what they want. But we also wanted our own. We also wanted a kind of a unique factor to this accelerator and what we wanted to choose from the startups as well. So sustainability for us was key. Sustainability, management of the resources. And so in relation to, speaking about it earlier, for example, it could be again sort of standards or certification that show that the product or the service has been coming from sustainably managed areas. Or it could also come from, for example, other organizations that you have an idea that these organizations are trustworthy. They're maybe even transparent in their activities. So we tried to add our own elements to this impact assessment criteria that were given. Sustainability was one, obviously because we were an EU-based accelerator. Any startups that came from within the European Union was another factor, although that may be different from accelerator to accelerator. But I would say sustainability for us was one of the most important, and how you evaluate sustainability is quite difficult in the sense that we had different elements that told us whether or not the model was sustainable. And this can also be in relation to its impact. For example, how many, if we're looking at models that have an impact on the amount of people where the resource is coming from, this can be in jobs given to women, for example, if we're looking at gender, or the way in which it brings the community together, so stronger social capital. These are all elements that we looked at that kind of contributed to the sustainability approach and evaluation of the businesses.
Okay, so that's a kind of a key differentiating feature, both in terms of the types of enterprises you selected in the first place. Okay, so maybe looking at, but did that, so that, I suppose, in terms of the question about what types of supports they required, they would have required more supports in terms of working through this kind of certification and standards and being able to show this sustainability aspect. Maybe if I ask Stuart and Stina the same question, were there any kind of specific supports that you identified among nature-based enterprises that could be maybe different from others? Stuart?
Yes. Yeah, sure. I think Colm's comment at the start about learning by doing was is very appropriate. I think heading into our incubator, our support, we thought that perhaps we could provide kind of some generic support tools similar to that we've provided in other incubator projects that would be relevant to lots of companies. And whilst they do have similar needs in relation to other sectors in some aspects, what we really found was that they have very specific support needs, and the support that we provided has been very bespoke. A lot of this is related to expertise in aspects like ecology, like performance evaluation and carbon accounting for natural systems. One particular challenge for MBEs relates to the lack of certainty in terms of performance. Because MBEs deliver projects based on nature-based solutions and nature and natural processes, performance can vary very much dependent on location, maturity, environmental conditions. And this means that a kind of a traditional product development pathway using lab testing and then rollout is not always applicable or appropriate. So there's really a need to adapt and provide support to tackle this kind of complexity in terms of their product. We've also found that one thing that's been incredibly useful has been networking support. Connecting different MBEs together has really been a very effective process for our MBEs. With lots of businesses that we're supporting, developing really new and emerging products and services, we've found that there's real synergies between the technologies that they're developing and real opportunities to bring these together to support each other, but also kind of to develop new products, bringing these NBEs together in these clusters.
Okay, that's fantastic. So, Stina, we've heard networking is really important. Really technical support in terms of being able to, I suppose, come back to measure the impact, and then the importance of standards and certification and kind of guiding startups through that process. Anything else that you've come across?
Well, I can really emphasize the network because that's really what Greencubator is the community that we built there is basically around network, because we know the importance of using each other, collaborating, sharing information, inspiration, knowledge, competences, and so on. It really depends on the service, of course, what challenge these MBEs are meeting. If we divide them into small services regarding very how to categorize, like projects that are under a certain I actually don't know how to categorize this, but we have two different categories of services within MBEs in Greencubator, and we have the bigger projects that are collaborating with a lot of stakeholders, so political, legal, commercial stakeholders. It can be an urban farm on top of a commercial store. So we really see that these types of projects need legal advisory, but definitely also funding advisory, because we're talking much bigger budgets. Another thing that we realized doing our learning by doing is also the communication part of it, because I don't know if that's a tendency in Denmark, but the fear of greenwashing, the fear of stating that you have an impact and but you can measure it, as we talked about. So communicating about your project and the impacts is really important as well, and a big challenge.
Yeah. Thanks, Dina. And I think that ties back to the point Colin made at the start about the importance of standards and certification, because there's this whole, and it's an issue that we always face, even on our own platform, when we're looking at enterprises. How do you ensure that, there's no greenwashing going on, that this is a genuine nature-based enterprise, in that it's contributing sustainably to biodiversity, and to nature conservation. So guys, that's really interesting. If I could move maybe now a little bit to your own incubators, because as I was saying, the number of nature-based enterprises is growing, and so far there's a lot of incubators, accelerator support programs across Europe targeting different industry sectors. But I have to say, I haven't come across too many focusing on this area. There's a lot in clean tech, there's a lot in energy, transport, sustainable transport. But in this area of kind of nature, using nature sustainably, and there's the diversity that we showed there is a lack of programs, maybe because the concept is so new and really it's only really starting to gain traction now. But I'm sure, like any incubator, it's a business. And could I maybe just talk to you a little bit and ask each of you about the funding sources for your own incubator and accelerator, and your own strategies for sustainability? And I might come to you, Colin, first, because you've been around first. So, Colin, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, well, I mean, we already have other programs in the pipeline. They've evolved a little bit since Ecostar, and you're absolutely right to say there are few programs like this. Before we even set up, we did a kind of an analysis of what was out there to understand how best to position ourselves, but there really wasn't anything out there, so we didn't have to worry about where to position ourselves, and that was great. But there are many, I would say, many accelerators focusing on what's what's popular in terms of impact. When you get sort of the amount of impact investment that's available now for certain accelerators and certain startups coming from developing countries, there's a lot there, philanthropy funds and so on. There's a lot there. For I would say for Europe, there's a lot less. And we question ourselves still why this is. We have a particular model in that, like I said in the very first presentation, we were able to present a project in a European funded program. And through that, through the business model that we developed, which was essentially the project itself, we presented it to an investor, and we were able to go to the European Commission and say, listen, what do you think about this? Is this possible? And they said, yeah, but they were really interested. So they were a little bit flexible with us too. And Ecostar was born. And we have actually managed to replicate this in other ways, in other European funded projects since, in diverse forms. I mean, the model is more or less the same, similar in that the accelerator program and so on, the startups that we're looking at. We haven't been able since to receive the same kind of private investment. And again, this is something we're looking into at the moment. The developing countries, so specifically Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, these are more popular countries when it comes to impact investment. Europe is still catching up, I think, when it comes to that are kind of models that we're running, the kind of models that we're interested in our programs. So I would say we have, two more in the pipeline at the moment. We have one focusing on nature and health. It's Green4C. Again, we apply a very similar model, but the focus is on more social enterprises, social nature-based enterprises, where again our focus is very much here on of course the nature element, but we're trying to connect what also nature can do for health, for human health. And then we've just started running another one, which the program itself will will run in 2 years. It's on urban forestry, so nature-based enterprises for urban forestry, specifically focusing on urban forestry. And the model again is quite similar.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm hearing two kind of things there. First of all, I suppose the importance of European support in getting these programs off the ground in the first place. And secondly, a little bit worrying, this lack of impact investors in Europe in this field in comparison to other developing countries. And I think that's a curiosity which we could probably spend another half an hour discussing that in detail. And maybe in another panel session we will. But Stina, maybe if I ask you in terms of Greencubator, because you've been going, did I hear you correctly? You said 300 startups you've supported at this stage. So would you say you have the sustainability model for your own incubator sussed at this stage?
Yes, well, Greencubator doesn't have a big financial muscle, actually. We're a non-profit, independent of public funding. Our financial model is very much program-based funding, if we do innovation programs, accelerator programs. But also we have memberships, both companies using our facilities, but also memberships for the network events and other services that we provide. And then we have partnerships. So yeah, Greencubator, we try to be independent and not politically controlled in what to focus on or do or deliver, because we found that a lot of projects end up in administration and less action. So we try to keep it very action based and as independent as possible.
Keeping it real. Good. I like the diversity of your approach there as well, which is important, not to be kind of over-reliant on one source of funding. Stu, can I ask you maybe from your perspective, what's your kind of funding model? You're probably new to the most recent thing. So what's your future funding model?
Yes, speaking of not relying on a single funding stream, Arena is built on an EU funding model as well. So it was funded through the European Regional Development Funding, matched with funding from the university and some funding from Barking Riverside Limited, this company that's developing this new community in East London. So in total, budget's about £1 million, with 50% of it coming from ERDF. And the business support is focused through this brand new ecology centre at the development. Originally, there was a plan to use the ecology centre financing as match for the project, which would have increased the budget of the project. But this didn't happen in the end because of a technicality. But it's definitely a good approach for similar initiatives. If these capital expenses are being put in and there's opportunities to build kind of incubators around them. In terms of sustainability, obviously ERDF is not an option for us in the UK going forward, unfortunately. Although we have already rolled out similar approaches through an East of England and a South East England project using ERDF funding. So it's definitely an approach that would be transferable to other locations in Europe, just not ours. So in the UK, we need to look at other business support and innovation funding opportunities to keep the NB incubator accelerator project going. So far this has included applying for EU Horizon 2020 funding under the Green Deal call, but we're also looking at more local funding sources around business support. And the other aspect to our sustainability is our relationship with the businesses that we work with and that we're supporting. So on the back of several of our Arena business assists, we've developed bids for further funding, further collaborative and knowledge exchange funding. This has included EU research funding and innovation funding, but also local and national knowledge exchange funding.
Okay. Right. So I'm hearing there a lot of importance, in particular, in getting these kind of programs off the ground, that EU funding and other types of public sector funding is particularly important initially. But then I think, Stina, and I think this is maybe something that Stu, that you could look towards, the model that they have in Green Incubator, this membership model, and the partnerships, I think in the long term, to bring in these more independent sources of financing sounds like a more sustainable approach in the long run. But speaking, I suppose, of the importance of public support, at this stage, I'm going to ask Agnieszka Ospiuk to join us in the panel. There we go. She's going to join us, and then we'll go back to the panel to take the questions from the chat afterwards. But we've heard a lot there, Agnieszka, about the importance of early stage funding from the public sector. And I suppose what I'd like you to do maybe is perhaps tell us what you're going to do in Poznan in June to raise awareness about this topic among policymakers and about other audiences. So maybe could you give us a sneak preview as to what you have planned in Poznan? And again, if anyone's got any questions or answers, they can post them in chat. And thank you for the questions coming in. I'm just reading through them and preparing them for the next session.
Okay, thank you, Siobhan. Good afternoon. Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, can you hear me now? Yes. Thank you, Siobhan. It's great to be here today with you. And on behalf of the city of Poznań and Poznań Connecting Nature team, I would like very warmly invite you to Connecting Nature Enterprise Summit in Poznań in Poland. Please remember the date, 29th and 30th June this year. Fantastic Glasgow Summit, great event, great people, is coming slowly to the end. But topics we could hear, present, learn, talk about are so worth further exploring that we just have to meet once again, and let's do it in Poznań. And later, let's do it once again in Genk. Firstly, let me show you where Poznań is located. We are in the west central part of Poland, in Greater Poland, Wielkopolska region. And we really hope that soon you will be able to visit us, not only virtually, and enjoy our parks, our forests, rivers, lakes, the same as our heritage and cultural venues Poznań is famous for. But as for now, we would like to present in June other face of Poznań. Maybe you don't know, but in Poland, Poznań is known as a city with entrepreneurship spirit. So let's check how it looks like. And in Poznań, we will be talking about such topics as: what are the barriers and solutions for nature-based enterprises, and how they correspond with expectation from the public sector, which is responsible for the majority of blue and green infrastructure in the cities. So it will be about public tenders versus business models. What are financing possibilities and business model just for nature-based solutions? NPS products and services can be driving force for local development, but how to find a common understanding on that new market between demand side and suppliers. And yes, here also the greenwashing subject could be very interesting for all of us. Nature-based enterprises. Do we always talk about the same? We learned a lot of examples about business and people behind it here in Glasgow, but we need more explore it. It's still a new market, and there are different languages of nature-based enterprises, different phases of nature-based economy, also creative one. So let's talk about it more. And I'm sorry, and one more thing. You are very welcome to plenary policy sessions, to parallel thematic sessions with different communities of Connecting Nature NBA platform and exploring possibilities of it. You will be invited for capacity building for enterprises and support organizations. And you will have chance to compare the challenges of nature-based economy in Europe and Brazil. And of course, we do our best to even in these virtual circumstances to show you our city and projects we developed, like natural playgrounds with eco demonstrators, floating gardens, our new experiences with opening and sharing green public space in the city, and many, many more. So remember, 29th and 30th June, stay tuned and pre-register for Poznan Summit. Siobhan, over to you.
I hope you can stay with us because I think you've got a really diverse program lined up for us there. So, well, I'm definitely looking forward to participating. Okay, so now we're going to head over to some of the questions from the chat, and then we will conclude the session closer to home. We'll give Sean a chance to tell us a little bit about what is being planned in Glasgow. Don't look so happy, Sean. Okay, so the first question, the first question that I know here is what support is available from EU national state governments, and the question is posed by somebody from Ireland who's wondering if state agencies such as Enterprise Ireland are up to speed on NBS innovation, and I think you fear they're not, but actually I have good news for you, they very much are. And in fact, I would say that Enterprise Ireland, and I'm going to give a shout out to Mark Sweeney, who's the national contact point for Horizon 2020 in Enterprise Ireland, and has been one of the greatest supporters in Ireland of nature-based solutions. And we have a number of different sectors involved, and cities from Limerick and Cork, Dublin, and projects from Go Green Roots, Connecting Nature, before that Terrace, which Stu also mentioned. And I know that Mark has recently joined, has been invited to join a European-wide network of startups as part of the Network Nature kind of joint action, which aims to get kind of national contact points across Europe, exchanging experience and talking about best practice and how they can support this sector. In saying that, I'd like to see more, of course. I'd like to see a much more active engagement in terms of the kind of specific support measures that could be put in place. But we certainly have a really strong advocate and champion in Mark. I don't know for the rest of you guys, maybe I don't know what the situation is in Italy, for example, in terms of support from state agencies specifically for this type of entity. Colin, are there specific supports?
Yeah, there are many grants available. It's not one of the sectors, especially public funding, that I deal with specifically, but I know there are many grants, innovation grants available, even accelerator grants available in Italy. They're very competitive when they do come out, so you have to know how to write very well these proposals. But I would say there are, on the contrary, depending on the sector, some innovation hubs in Italy that are very interesting, private innovation hubs. And specifically, I'm speaking about, well, in our sector, there's H-Farm. I'm not sure if anybody has heard of it before, but it's the Silicon Valley of forestry and agricultural sector in Europe at the moment. Is an extremely interesting one if you're working in these sectors. Very tech oriented. But they have grown. They have a very interesting accelerator model, and they accept applications from all over Europe, all over the world. And they have a series of accelerators on continuous cycles, and that could be one. Other ones Milan is quite full of as well different innovation hubs. These again will be private. So public funding there is, but it's quite competitive. In the private sector you get most again. But again, speaking about nature-based enterprises more specifically, I would say H-Farm is the most interesting for those.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm glad you.
Yeah, sorry, just also there are a number of other much smaller incubators, social impact oriented incubators. Again, they would accept most, I would say most nature-based enterprise models if there is an element of impact in the integrated somehow into the the business model.
Okay, I think you raise a really good point there, not just to look at the public sector, but also to see how can we engage private sector investment in this area. It goes back to the earlier point about the lack of impact investors in the EU in comparison with other areas. But it's good to know that there is, there is both. We should be looking at both the private sector support as well as the public sector. Very quickly, in Denmark, is it the same situation? Would you say that there is a good support for nature-based enterprises in either the public or private, or both, Stina?
I think there is a rising tendency, yes, towards this, but there are still we still have lack of political will. There's a lot of talking, but very little walking. But I think we see a rising awareness of the importance of supporting with public funding, and also private investors in nature-based solutions.
Yeah, I always use the comparison with the nature-based enterprises with the creative industry sector. Like 20 years ago, nobody had heard of the creative industry sector, and it is a collective term, an umbrella term for a group of companies in an area. But now every single city, every single country has recognized the potential of this sector. And that's what I think with nature-based enterprises. And as we move towards this Green Deal and, the Green Deal vision, that, there'll be much more investment in this area as the awareness increases. And just, I'll quote one statistic from Austria that I came across recently in terms of there's the hundreds of enterprises. Actually, do you know what? I'll maybe post the report up in the chat because I don't have the exact figures to hand. But what they did was they quantified the number of enterprises, the number of turnover, and the number of jobs created in this sector. And I think that's the kind of figures and the kind of research we need to have to help policymakers in this sector and put more concrete actions in place. I don't know, Stuart, or from the UK, or Agnieszka from Poznan, if you have got any comments on that. Do you think there's enough specific supports for this sector? Who wants to go first? Stu?
Shall I go? Okay. I think possibly a similar experience to Stina. It's quite a rapidly changing sector. There's lots of incubation support around clean tech, sustainability approaches. Nature-based enterprises is very much emerging. I think we've seen a real change from when we first put the application in to where we are now. When we first put the application in, there was definitely a feeling that perhaps the awareness wasn't there. So we blended nature-based enterprises and resource efficiency. Thinking that maybe if we just went for nature-based enterprises, that the awareness amongst the funders wouldn't necessarily be there. Now, I don't think that's the case. I very much think you could push that kind of agenda. We have more and more kind of opportunities emerging. I think there's a funding call tomorrow, which is a DEFRA Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund, which is very much this kind of process, looking at kind of economic models around nature-based solutions and nature-based enterprises. So yeah, it's changing, but we've seen a real change in the lifetime of the project.
Yeah, no, I mean, even I remember when we were talking about nature-based solutions in the Tourist project 5 years ago, it was a new term and people didn't know what nature-based solutions were, let alone nature-based enterprises. So it's amazing how quickly that has changed and how much uptake of this terminology we're seeing in policy documents and then from that in actual support programs. So have Poznan and Poland come out and declared their support for this sector yet, Agnieszka?
For sure, I see the crucial role of municipality, but also the EU programs. And again, municipality to use the EU programs for giving kind of seed money or mentorship for NB and promote this participatory approach, which is characteristic for for NBSs for implementing in the cities. So yes, we have a lot to do for next years. A lot of possible new tasks to undertake as a municipalities.
Great, and I know that we're working together with our cities and Connecting Nature on implementing these kinds of support strategies. And that reminds me, we have a guidebook for cities on our website on putting in place this kind of strategy to support and stimulate nature-based entrepreneurship. One of the questions which has come up a couple of times now in the chat is about the kind of success rates of startups, because I think we all know that a large number of tech startups fail. Do we have statistics yet for this sector? My thinking is because really we're the only ones doing research in this area, I think, directly on nature-based enterprises, and we've come up with the typology. I would be very surprised if there were, reports already on this. But I know it is something that we're looking at in our own research. But I'd be really interested in finding out. Maybe Colm, you've probably, and Stina, you're both really well established. Did you collect statistics in terms of market failures or successes?
Yeah, no, the market fit. As we were doing the programs, yes. Whether this kind of data and information is already. I mean, there are some things coming out now, but certainly when we started off, there was very little nature-based enterprises. So it's like you said. I think the people who are working on it are maybe us and maybe some other few specifically on nature-based enterprises speaking about failures. Yeah, going back to maybe something I said earlier, and it's related as well to, I suppose, the funding gap specifically, and also mentioned there when it comes to impact investing. We speak about in our program nature-based enterprises, they must have an impact, and I find especially to get the kind of interest from the impact investor that you want for them to select the model for the program. What we've seen is that European startups they tend to fail a little bit more, and that's not very promising. But they tend to fail a little bit more than US or for example, we're also focusing in our first program. We focused as well in Africa and in South America. And why this happens? Well, certainly why it happened in our programs, and we're also studying those models. It happened, I guess, because there was many of these startups had second or sometimes even third jobs. So the startup wasn't their enterprise wasn't the focus of the main focus of their activity. And I think that this is a very important lesson. And networks, we spoke about networks as well. But that's I think a more minor issue when we speak about European. Really, if you really want to get out of the valley of death, as you mentioned before, you really have to give it your whole, and you can't be doing 2 or 3 other jobs. I mean, if you're bootstrapping, I suppose you do have the money has to be something coming from somewhere, but there is that stage where you just have to throw yourself into it, and European startups tend to have multiple activities going on. Is what we've found.
Okay, thanks. Unfortunately, I think we're running out of time, and I can see quite a few interesting questions coming through in terms of technology, which I'm sure, Snina, you'd love to answer, in terms also of, how to ensure that it's and how to make green space more accessible. The one that I would like to finish with very briefly is there was a comment, and it was related to that question of startups and financing. Have any of you, has this generation of impressive NBE incubators learned from the experience of social impact incubators which have emerged over the last 15 years? And there's a specific example given there of the Impact Hub. Have you guys, when you were developing, looked at these impact incubator models and have been able to integrate any of the learning from that into your own models? I don't know if anybody wants to take that. Who'd like to start?
Yeah, I can answer in very briefly for what I know. I mean, the Impact Hub model is a franchise, and I've seen it pop up we've had partnerships in some African countries with the Impact Hub, and it's a very replicable model, and it's a brand. It's essentially a brand now, and a credible brand. So if you get a startup or an enterprise that comes through, social enterprise that comes through, social business model that comes through an Impact Hub, it's a little bit more credible than maybe Impact Hub X with a different name from the same place. For nature is a little bit more difficult to sell, in the sense that it's also difficult to value. One of the things we do in Etifor is we try to value nature and its range of ecosystem services, but trying to sell that is takes a little bit more effort. I think social and social impact sells more for impact investors, we've seen anyway. And I guess it's paradoxical in a sense, because you also need to think that the value of what I showed from the very first slide of the presentation, the value of what deforestation will have on the world is going to be incredible in coming years. Don't know if that answers it.
So it sounds like you have certainly taken some of those learnings into account. Stina, I might leave the last word with you, because I mean, you mentioned you've 300 startups which have gone through. From your own experience, have they been successful, and have you kind of looked at other social impact incubator models to kind of build your own business sustainably?
Yes, luckily we've seen MBEs and other entrepreneurs being successful, and the way we really see their successes is when they grow too big in human capacity, and we don't have enough space for them to be there. So that means that either they got funding or really success with their project, and they need to hire in more people. So that's a really good success to measure there. We also see that since Greencubator was founded in 2015, with some of the startups that was part of the Greencubator back then are still existing. So they passed the 5 years test. We don't have specific numbers on that regarding the NBEs that has been through Greencubator, but the community, especially around Copenhagen, is not that big, so we can follow the companies closely and see how they're raising money to extend or scale up their projects, and some of them also going international. So that's great to see.
Always positive. It sounds like you need to collaborate with the university and get some student to track these 300 over time, so that we have this kind of information. And it's certainly something we're researching at the moment. We're talking to a number of different enterprises about scaling up. But listen, we're coming to the end of our session, but it wouldn't be right to. We've heard from Denmark, we've heard from Italy, we've heard from London, we've heard from Poland. This time, not putting any pressure on you, Sean, but let's hear what's happening in Glasgow. And I have to say, I love, when Sean joined the project, who's very much in planning mode. And now we've thrown Sean at the deep end in terms of, have you thought about nature-based entrepreneurship in Glasgow, Sean, and what can you do to support it? So, Sean, would you give us a little bit of, if you could wrap up this session by telling us a little bit about your journey and your experience?
Yeah, thanks, Siobhan. Yeah, it's fair to say that I'm at an early stage in my kind of nature-based enterprise journey, and I think we all are in Glasgow. So it's been great to hear from the other speakers there who are far more experienced, and it's good to see that there are some success stories there. So as well as being a host compare, I am actually a chartered urban planner as well, and I work in the Connected Nature project in Glasgow. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our plans around our nature-based enterprise strategy that we're developing in Glasgow. So first of all, why should we prepare a nature-based enterprise why should we prepare for nature-based enterprises? And I think we've heard quite a lot about that already today. So I'm briefly going to go through this slide. Basically, we can't really rely on the public sector, not in Scotland anyway. It's definitely, we're experiencing diminishing resources, and there are other priorities too. So that's a barrier that we have to try and overcome in some other way. Also, a thriving nature-based enterprise sector or nature-based economy allows us to develop far more environmentally and socially friendly businesses, helping to create more sustainable and productive communities whilst achieving our ambitious net zero targets. And also, now is the right time for us here in Europe and across the world, but definitely here in Scotland as well. The Scottish Government are now moving the national policy agenda, especially in relation to urban planning policy with the upcoming National Planning Framework 4, which was mentioned by the Cabinet Secretary the other day, but also with economic policy too, and the strengthening relationship between the Wellbeing Economic Alliance. So I think that the plan is that we need to strike whilst the iron is hot, and that's what we're trying to do here. So lastly, slide just skipped. Apologies about that. So lastly, and this relates to my first point, in Glasgow, for those of you who don't know, our Connecting Nature exemplar is the delivery plan mapping of the Council's open space strategy. We want to see Glasgow's open spaces used in the best way possible so that they provide water management, be suitable for children's play, improve habitat connections, and can be used by a whole range of people for multifunctional purposes. But all this requires maintenance and stewardship, which the public sector cannot achieve on its own. So we want to develop a robust local nature-based economy, including nature-based enterprises and organisations. So before I go on to talk about what we are doing in Glasgow, I want to give a few of some of the nature-based organisations already well established in the local area. And if anyone is here from any of these organisations, please do comment in the chat, especially if I get anything wrong. Okay, first up is ERTS. ERTS are a nature-based enterprise who use nature in an indirect way by providing landscape architectural services. What's great about ERTS is that they also get involved in community-based work too. And the picture you can see here is of a community garden in the east of Glasgow on vacant land, which is a big issue for the city, being post-industrial. Next is Green Roofs, who are also a nature-based enterprise, but they use nature in a direct way to create green roofs. They have a broad range of options, and this example is taken from the Wedge building in the Pollock area of Glasgow, which is being used for community purposes at the moment. And lastly, we have Urban Roots, who could probably be best described as a nature-based organisation because they run under a charity model. They're involved in so many nature-friendly projects across the city, and this is an image of an outdoor forest classroom, for example. So last slide, I just want to briefly introduce our plans in Glasgow. Well, the main part of our proposal is to develop a nature-based incubator, as you might have guessed. We're now at an advanced stage of development of a pilot programme, so I'm just going to briefly go through the steps that we've taken so far to get to where we are. Step one was to ensure that we raised awareness about our open space strategy and ensure that our plans for a nature-based enterprise strategy aligned with our nature-based solution exemplar. So one of our main criteria for project ideas for this pilot is that they help to achieve the objectives of the open space strategy, especially with stewardship. Step two was to make sure we found the right partners to work with. We can't do it all by ourselves, and we recognise that we have to rely on other expertise to help us develop this idea. So we carried out a mapping exercise using a simple methodology, which allowed us to red, amber, green potential partners. And an important point here to note is that through this research, we discovered that actually there was no focused nature-based enterprise incubator or accelerator in Glasgow. Others were maybe doing it on the side, but not focused. So this is an area that's really new in Scotland and that we're getting involved with now. So at the same time, we have also built new relationships with colleagues at Glasgow City Council, and have also partnered up with Glasgow Centre for Civic Innovation, who have a focus on improving societal issues, which is a key thing for us. And also we've partnered up with the Melting Pot, who are an established business incubator already. So the final step has been to develop a customised support programme, basically the nature-based incubator. And to do this, we consulted with industry experts, and I'm pleased to say that we have a schedule agreed now and a first draft of the detailed programme. The pilot is expected to run for about 10 weeks and support hopefully between 3 and 5 nature-based enterprise or organisations. So it is small scale, but I guess you do have to start somewhere. We are aiming to open the application process in the last week of April. With a start date of mid-May. So things are moving really fast. Thereafter, the plan is to learn from the pilot and launch a formal programme during the COP conference later in the autumn. So my advice at the moment is please do watch this space. There'll be more communication going out locally soon. So thanks everyone. Thanks, Siobhan.
Thank you, Sean, and what a fitting way to end the session here today with those inspiring words. And it's really exciting to see this program being launched, and we're really looking forward to seeing many more nature-based enterprises from Glasgow. So look, we're bang on time. So it all remains for me to say is to very much thank our panel of speakers. Thanks Stina, thanks Stuart, thanks Colm, Agnieszka and Sean, for this kind of whirlwind tour of incubators and nature-based enterprises across Europe. And a very special mention also to the 12 nature-based enterprises who featured in our video at the start. We wish them continued success. And if you're interested in finding out any more about them or joining any of our communities of practice filled with these enterprises and many more, please join us on the Nature-Based Enterprise platform. I'm sure you'll find all the information on the chat or in the Connecting Nature booth. Thank you so much, guys. Keep up the good work. We'll get there with the nature-based economy. Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a